We're about to record. We'll see. We do have one person. So we may want to give it a few
I'm
minutes.
glad we have one person. That's
Oh,
good.
two people are coming in.
All right.
Okay, here they
Yeah,
come.
they're rolling.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. We'll wait a moment or two because just so that everyone has a chance to get in. Because I think we're expecting about 20 people. So.
Well, you never know if the Holy Trinity Alumni Association gets in, or you don't know how many we're going to have.
40 of those people are ready to rock. That's the important thing.
I've gotten a lot of suggestions from them already. And in fact, it was my friend Cynthia Clayton who reminded us not to forget Pat Benatar of Lindenhurst.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all Trinity right there.
Well, I think I'm just going to start and people will come in. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Ozolins from the library. Thanks for coming to this program on the Long Island Sound with David Browne and Tom Junod. We've been lucky to have these two here before for other fun conversations. So thank you both for coming back. I hope we get to do more. They're always great. David Browne is a senior writer at Rolling Stone magazine and a longtime music journalist. His work has appeared in many major publications. He's written several books, including works on Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, The Grateful Dead, Jeff and Tim Buckley, and Sonic Youth, among others. And he's currently working on a history of music in Greenwich Village. Tom Junod is a senior writer at ESPN. He's won 2 national magazine awards. He's written for The Atlantic and GQ, but he's perhaps best known for his Esquire profile of Fred Rogers that served as the basis for the film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. He grew up on Long Island and is a veteran of Hammerheads, Rum Bottoms, Speaks, and The Right Track In. And with that, I turn it over to both of you. Thank you both.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Hey, David.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm doing good. Are we going to go there already? We're going to start doing Long Island greetings. Like, how are you? We're going to start doing that like right off the bat.
Well, we'll get into this in a bit, but I certainly, being a Jersey boy originally, you're going to have to teach me the ways of these things.
Okay, I'll teach you the ways, but I have to just tell you, I mean, right from the start, I think that the fundamental dynamic of Long Island rock is that it's not Jersey rock.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is rock that exists in the shadows, and we, because the 2 monster acts from across the Hudson, Sinatra and Springsteen, and we have, they have Sinatra, we have Billy, they have Springsteen, we have Billy, they have Patti Smith, we have Billy, so that's kind of where it all came from,
Well, let's talk about first how we got into this whole topic, Tom.
Sure.
You and I both spend copious amounts of time on Long Island, especially in the summer. But it was it's fitting that we start this whole conversation. The idea for this webinar actually started in a record store on Long Island. What do you remember of that day?
So we went, I think it was on we went on Father's Day to Sunday Records in Riverhead. And it's called Sunday Records in Riverhead because number 1, it's in Riverhead, and number 2, it's only open on Sundays. And it's pretty great. It's a great store, and I'm going to give it a plug right here. But one of the things that they do at Sunday Records is they lay out all their records not by alphabetical order, but according to Long Island radio station. So
which was an amazing thing. When you told me that blew my mind. Yeah.
So there's a WLIR section that specializes in sort of 80s new wave like LIR did. Then there's an EHM section that sort of specializes in a mix of music, the eclectic stuff, which is what EHM does. And then there's WBAB. which is the classic rock station and has been the classic rock station on Long Island before there was even such thing as classic rock. It is the station of the most, I would say, perhaps the most static and immovable playlist in the country. I don't think it's played a song, that came out later than 1979 since 1979, which makes it a perfect Long Island station.
And all this was really fascinating to me because, as I mentioned, I grew up in New Jersey. And, if you grew up in the 60s and 70s when I did, yes, you knew about Bruce, you knew the Four Seasons, Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. There was a certain Jersey sound in the air. And as someone who, from a young age, was trying to be a music scholar and reading lots of music books and magazines, you would read about the San Francisco sound of the 60s, the LA sound of the 70s, New Orleans music, New York City and punk, Chicago blues. Later you had the Athens, Georgia sound that gave us REM and many others. But I don't remember ever coming across anything about the Long Island sound. It was never chronicled. It was never, at least, not in any super prominent places. I should give a shout out here to the Long Island Music Hall of Fame and Tom Needham, who are doing an excellent job of making up for that lost research in all these years. But it's always like a mysterious thing. What is Long Island rock? I knew Billy Joel was from Long Island because he was very upfront about it. And I think I knew Blue Oyster Cult were from there, but it was kind of a mysterious thing. So when you brought this up and we were in the record, so I thought, wow, I think we started talking about how does one define Long Island rock and leading us to this point.
So Long Island sound, it definitely has no cachet whatsoever, but there is definitely a Long Island sound. And I think that's kind of the whole purpose of this webinar is to sort of define that. So, right. But I grew up in Wantagh, Long Island, and which is right next to Levittown, Long Island, which I think is important because Levittown was definitely the gravitational, pull there, and the gravitational pull of a lot of Long Island music. It was, so growing up in Wantagh, I had the great fortune of having a brother and sister that were 10 years older than me. So I was kind of steeped in Long Island music from the beginning. My brother and sister used to go out to a place in Quogue called, what was the name of that place?
The Barge.
The Barge, yeah. They used to go to the Barge to see the Rascals. And, the Rascals were not a Long Island band per se. I think they were from Queens and Jersey. But they were Italian, so they were sort of like a semi-official thing, and they did kind of a gritty, sort of garage rocky for a while, Blue-Eyed Soul, and I think that was kind of the founding sound of Long Island was that sound, and so I have props here from my brother, and I still have his 45 collection.
And before we get, go ahead. Yeah, show us that.
Okay, here is the
wow.
Vanilla Fudges, You Keep Me Hanging On, and the Hassles, the 45 from Billy Joel's first band, who my brother used to see at the Barge in Quogue. Wow. So all of that stuff was stuff that used to get played in my house. And I remember my dad being outraged about the Vagrants. He didn't care about the music, but he hated the name. Who would want to be a vagrant? A vagrant's, somebody gets picked up and thrown in jail. Who would want to be a vagrant? So that was Long Island rock for me.
Before we get too deep into this, let's throw out two things to everyone. Number one is our definition of Long Island rock. A lot of people include Queens, and that we're not going to do that. I personally think of Queens as it's one of the 5 boroughs of Manhattan. And if you get into Queens, musicians from that area, we're going to kind of leave them out. We're going to focus on Nassau and Suffolk County, people who started in those areas, to kind of narrow things down a little bit and make it really true Long Island. The second thing we want to throw out to everyone watching, listening, is we want you to think about who is the greatest Long Island rocker. And we're going to throw that out there. We're going to circle back to that at the end of our program. And if people want to throw out their suggestions in the chat room. We'll be happy to go over that. But yes, Tom, let's pick up where you left off, because it does seem like Long Island rock really did start in the mid 60s with a certain R&B garage kind of sound. You had the Rascals and the Vagrants, which was also the home, of course, of Leslie West, who went on to found Mountain, playing in various bars. When did you first start going to see bands like this? Was that probably a little later?
So, I mean, one of the funny things about growing up in Long Island is that, like, a lot of, rock people, rock, I wouldn't call them rock stars, but guys who were in bands, lived in your town, and you know who they were, and they were kind of local guys. So right around the block from me was Joe Franco, who became the drummer for the Good Rats. I went to school with Frank Franco, his brother, and I used to hear Joe Franco, practice. And so that was kind of like an early exposure. But the heyday for me seeing Long Island bands was definitely the 70s, when there were just clubs all around. There was Rum Bottoms and Hammerheads and Speaks and the Right Track In, which I named and stuff. But there was a lot of them. And you can, like, if you ever go to like any of these like Long Island, nostalgia sites, I mean, people just like talk all day long about, Long Island rock clubs. Right. But the thing about like the Long Island rock clubs is that, a lot of the bands weren't that good. They really weren't that good. So it wasn't like you were going to CBGB's or like a legendary club to see like the Talking Heads. You were going to Hammerheads to see Zebra, or you were we used to go to this place called, it was a community theater called the Arena Players. And we used to go to see a band called Harlequin, which did theatrical rock. That was like, so they used to do like Genesis songs, and I was really into progressive rock at the time. So we used to go to these, but the lead singer for Harlequin for a time that used to do Genesis songs was Dee Snider.
Wow, there we go.
Yeah, of Twisted Sister.
Later of Twisted Sister. Yeah, it's an interesting evolution there on Long Island, because you go from these kind of garage rock bands of the mid 60s, and then the music gets a little heavier. It's starting with Vanilla Fudge, who really embodied heavy, and they would take modern pop songs, like Just Keep Me Hanging On, and slow them down, lots of organ. And I think we start to see the beginning of one of the defining characteristics of Long Island rock, which is a certain lack of subtlety.
It's total lack of subtlety.
Yeah, which we, of course, Billy Joel then really becomes embody that later. But we had an earlier discussion, Tom, about a year ago on this excellent Shelter Island Library dialogues on what we call the Frisbee guys, the sensitive singer-songwriter types. Yeah. We can't really name many of those from Long Island. It was the Long Island sound was a much heavier, kind of in-your-face kind of sound, and I think it started with people like Vanilla Fudge and some of those bands you saw.
Well, I think that the Long Island sound was sort of in your face, even when it was folk music. Like Harry Chapin was certainly not, I mean, he was many things, and he was, I think I like a lot of Harry Chapin songs. I think Taxi is a great song. Right,
absolutely. But
subtle he was not.
Subtle he was not, I mean, Harry, just so our listeners know, of course, he grew up in Greenwich Village, but then moved to Huntington right when his career was kind of starting. And yes, like, he had this great idea of writing a song about an aging disc jockey whose career is going down the toilet as he's getting older. And I love this song, but there's not a lot of subtlety in calling the song WOLD. That's kind of the embodiment. I love that song in the record, but it's sort of a funny title of it.
Well, I mean, obviously we anything that we're talking about now, we'll also be talking about when we talk about Billy Joel, because I mean, and I think that we need to save, move Billy, and save Billy for a little bit towards the end. But But I mean, Billy, any sort of thing about Long Island music, Billy personifies and embodies as time goes on. And the lack of subtlety certainly being one of those things.
Yeah, and the Hassles, they made 2 records, and the first one is kind of like a Rascals knockoff, kind of a blue-eyed soul thing. And then the second album, Hour of the Wolf, the title alone, you're going into some heavier territory. And they switched to that almost proggy, heavy, organy sort of sound. And of course, then Billy had Attila, his hard rock band. So I mean, he really
I've never heard Attila. I've never.
There's
heard
a reason most people
from
haven't
him.
heard Attila. The album. I wish I had the album in front of me, but
You might be the only person who actually has the Attila record. I don't know.
But yes, there were. But during this period, Long Island was creeping up in the consciousness. I would say, two of the members of the Love and Spoonful, not John Sebastian, were from Long Island, and
You
Long
get
Island
kind of frisbee right there, David. Frisbee,
Yeah,
you little
Little
frisbee.
Frisbee and John. But they had a song called Big Noise from Spionk on one of the early records. So I think that's probably one of the only times Spionk was immortalized in music as an instrumental. And then of course at Stony Brook plays a big role in history, because that is where a group called the Soft White Underbelly came together.
Right.
And they became, in the early 70s, of course, Blue Oyster Cult.
Right.
One of the heaviest of the 70s.
Sure. So heavy that they were thought to be satanic for a while. That's heavy.
And I will argue that their song "Career of Evil," which was co-written with Patti Smith, is one of the great, almost like lost, great 70s hard rock tunes. It should be up there with "Smoke on the Water" and all that kind of stuff. Most people don't know it anymore, but "Career of Evil" is a classic.
But so one of the interesting thing that's going on like in the late 70s and early 80s with Long Island music is that it's sort of proto hair metal, right? I mean, it's early hair metal, and I mean, and the hair proves it. I mean, Dee Snider didn't invent that hair. He like inherited it from like the guys on Zebra, and all these guys, well, like Steve, also, a Long Island guy was Steve Vai. Steve Vai from Carl Plays. Yeah. Great pyrotechnic guitar god who also had hair like Howard Stern. I mean, it was the total Long Island. It was a real look of these guys.
And these are the days when you did, this is the pre-internet days. Well, you can look up information on people right away. I was actually working in Carl Place at a long defunct music magazine called Music and Sound Output. And in, I guess it was 86, we put David Lee Roth on the cover with his new band that he formed after Van Halen. And the guitar player was Steve Vai. I think he was maybe sticking his guitar between his legs on the cover, or some kind of very metal guitar guy pose. And we get a call one day in our office, and it's Steve Vai's dad saying, "Hi, I'm Mr. Vai, and my son's on your cover, and we live here. Can I come by and get a couple of copies?" And we were like, Steve Vai is from Carl Place? Kind of blew our mind. He was a lovely, lovely man. Came over, we gave him a bunch of copies. He was incredibly proud of his son.
And did he have a huge shag haircut? Did Mr. Vai
I don't remember, but I don't believe it was. I don't believe it was.
Yeah.
But he was very proud of his son. But before we get to the metal thing, I think one of the interesting things about Long Island rock, once we get into the 70s, and again, putting Billy Joel aside and even putting Blue Oyster Cult aside, is and this is one thing I did pick up on as a kid, because if you read music magazines, you'd read about all these bands from Long Island that were coming out and putting out records, and none of them made it. You had, the Stanton Anderson band.
I used to see him every week. I used to see Stanton every week at Speaks.
And they were like they played sort of Southern rock on Long Island. They played
Southern rock music.
Yeah.
On Long Island. which guaranteed a certain amount of people, but still, it was they weren't going to make it playing Southern rock.
Southern Shore rock, perhaps they were playing.
South Shore for sure.
South Shore rock.
That wasn't their sound.
There was not this, and then you had a group called Barnaby Bye, who were a bit poppier and had the guy from the Blues Magoos was in there, and the Alessi brothers were in there. They kind of didn't quite make it. And of course, the Good Rats.
Of
who
course,
were
the
kind of
Good Rats.
the king of the almost made it but never quite bands on Long
Right.
Island. Did you ever see them live?
I never saw them live.
Okay.
My wife Janet did. Janet saw the Talking Heads open for the Good Rats in Albany.
Wow.
Which shows sort of how close the Good Rats came to making it.
They came pretty close. They had a bunch of records, and they had I seem to remember, see, I didn't I grew up listening to the New York rock stations, WNEW-FM and WPLJ, and you wouldn't hear any of these bands, but every once in a while I do remember somebody playing a song from the Good Rats album, Rat City in Blue. You have to love it just for that name alone. But yeah, they didn't seem like they were at the top of the game back then either. There's something about the Good Rats that
Well, so they had an anthem. They had a song that was called Tasty.
yes.
And it was about they were sort of a self-mocking band, which was kind of cool about a lot of Long Island music. I would say that, I mean, if you're going to define like one of the characteristics of it, is that it has something of a sense of humor about itself. It doesn't take itself that seriously. And that extends, to everybody. I mean, it's not like, like Bruce Springsteen with these, Woody Guthrie meets Phil Spector opuses,
Right.
I mean, there was not a lot of pretension in Long Island rock, and the Good Rats were that. Maybe they weren't even like pretentious enough. I mean, they used to, their lead singer, Pepe Marcello, used to go out and play air guitar on a baseball bat,
And I think which leads to an important point about a lot of these bands. They were not cool.
They
They
were
were sort of proudly not cool. You can look at pictures of a lot of these bands back then. They've got lots of hair. A lot of people had lots of hair back then, but it was sort of like there'd be lots of frizzy hair sticking out, mustaches.
right.
They weren't dressed in the most flamboyant stage outfits or anything like that. And what did that speak to? You mentioned kind of earlier that there was Long Island was in the shadow of all this other stuff, and was that reflected in these bands?
It's totally reflected in these. So like look at like some of like the other like hair bands, like Motley Crue. Well, Motley Crue, I mean, you can say what you want about them, but they were cool. Van Halen was cool. Twisted Sister was amazingly uncool.
Right.
And it was the key. It's the key to understanding Long Island. And I think, or at least Long Island rock. And so if it's the key to understanding Long Island rock, I dare say it's the key to understanding Long Island in general, is that it's really not that cool, which is, I think, one of the things that I really love about like these never were bands, but of course it's what made them never were bands.
Yeah, they really stuck with that, these bands, even though it's kind of may have wrecked their careers in some way. I don't think the Good Rats went through their new wave stage.
Really?
They shaved their heads, they shaved their hair, and had synthesizers or whatever. I think they kind of stuck with that, but it's an interesting, it's interesting the way that is reflected in the music. The music and the geography are kind of interconnected in that way, leading of course to Billy Joel.
But and that will also, like everything that we've talked about, it'll bring us to Billy Joel. But here's a question though, there's a big star that comes out of Long Island and that same world around this time. And here's my question to you. Was Pat Benatar cool? Because she was a big star. She was a big Long Island star.
She was a big star. And, that is the beginning of the next phase, really, because you have you have this sort of heavy rock bands. We talked about the Blue Oyster Cults, or Vanilla Fudge leading into the Blue Oyster Cults and so forth. Then you have these kind of Good Rats, Barnaby Bye kind of bands from the 70s, a lot of whom didn't quite make it. Then in the early 80s, you have the dawn of the Long Island hard rock sound, the kind of metal sound, which Pat, then Twisted Sister, Pat Benatar, Zebra, who you mentioned, who I think were from New Orleans, actually, relocated
Were they really?
here.
Yeah, I just remember
Yeah,
them playing at Rum Bottoms and Hammerheads. That was
Yeah,
they were one of those bands.
Yeah, they somehow they became a Long Island band, and that was I think a big moment. A lot of those bands were big. I mean, Pat Benatar and Twisted Sister. It took Twisted Sister a long time. They were paying their dues for a long time, but those bands ended up actually having hits that all those Long Island bands in the 70s didn't. And it really coincided with MTV and music videos, and suddenly that sort of uncool Long Island hard rock thing was kind of made cool by MTV and all the visuals. And Pat Benatar, she wasn't Patti Smith, but she wasn't Patti Smythe. That's a very important distinction. She had a certain cool kind of vibe to her, I would say. She wasn't cheesy. Now, of course, the other person around this time that we're almost forgetting, Eddie Money.
Okay.
Who was born in Brooklyn, but grew up in
Levittown, exactly.
Levittown, the heart of rock and roll in Long Island.
Yeah.
And Eddie Money, to me, was the embodiment of a lot of what we're talking about. He was kind of an uncool, kind of every schlub kind of guy. Of course, that's what we loved about him. I loved a lot of his songs.
Exactly.
He didn't be anything other than he basically proclaimed, I'm not Lou Reed. I'm not David Byrne. I'm just this kind of regular guy like you and me. I'm up on the stage. I've screwed a few things up in my life, and I'm going to sing about them in my songs. And he was almost Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen are together, but Eddie was almost in that, male identification that Bruce had with his fans.
Yeah. Eddie Mahoney I think his name was Eddie Mahoney. His father was a cop, which, you just can't get more Long Island than that.
Right.
I think that like sort of like Eddie, I always thought of Eddie Money as like, he definitely identified with the lunch bucket, rockers, like Billy was for a while, that Bruce sort of tried to be for a while before he kind of, really took off. And like sort of like as John Bon Jovi was to Bruce, Eddie Money was to like, Huey Lewis in the News or something.
Or something like that. Yeah. I would argue better, but people disagree. Before we get too much into the 80s, let's throw a few more things out there that are important. Jim Steinman, the auteur behind Meatloaf, was from Hewlett Harbor.
Wow.
Harry Chapin, we of course have mentioned. I should also note that we have put together a playlist, a Spotify playlist of just a sampler of Long Island rock, and I believe the library is sharing it on its chat page. You will notice on that the Rolling Stones' Memory Motel. And of course, Tom and I both are well aware of the fact that the Rolling Stones are British, not from Long Island. But we put that on there because that is a key song for me. I love that song. It was from 1976 on the Black and Blue album. But at some point I read that it was about some fling Mick Jagger had in a motel in Montauk. Yeah. And I was like, again, like I didn't know much about the Hamptons or that area. And I thought, wow, what is that place? Was that a legendary place for you?
No, it wasn't for me, but that song, people identify, a lot of Long Island people know that about that song, that it's about Montauk. And so it really is kind of like, a different category of everything that we've been talking about. And we've been talking about like Lindenhurst rock and roll and Levittown rock and roll. And that's like, East End rock and roll. It's about people on vacation, you know? So it's sort of what it was about.
And that is a very important part of the story. You know, you always got to have that, you know.
Certainly a very important part of Long Island.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, Jimmy Buffett wrote one of his Broadway shows on Shelter Island when he was hanging out there.
Gee,
About
wow.
It's almost 30 years ago.
I almost don't want to know that. Yeah, I wish, you know.
We saw him out there. We saw him on the Shelter Island Ferry once, and he was wearing a T-shirt that said Jimmy Buffett. So we kind of put two and two together there.
Wow.
But
so we got to go back to Jim Steinman though, because Jim Steinman, I mean, that's rock opera there, man.
That is. And he, you know, that album, Bat Out of Hell, was almost like the Long Island Born to Run. It had
it was
sound,
yes.
You know, but again, not as cool as Born to Run. Meatloaf, not as cool as Bruce. You know,
yeah, nobody's debating if the second line of Paradise by the Dashboard Lights is it doesn't have the word sways or waves in it, you know, which is like the current debate over Bruce.
Right.
You know?
And Meatloaf, who was not from Long Island, I'm pretty sure, but you know, he in his way embodied that, you know, that uncool thing. He was this kind of big, schlubby, long-haired guy, sweaty guy, and you know, he embraced that. He totally embraced
so even the Long Island rock opera is uncool. You know, and it's about being uncool. It's you know, it's really what the whole thing is about.
Yeah. Now then, of course, interesting, we move into the mid to late 80s, and the stars, what's very interesting about that period is the stars that come out of Long Island are no longer suddenly rock stars. We have pop stars. Right. We have Debbie Gibson from Merrick.
Right.
We have Taylor Dane from Baldwin.
Right.
And we have hip hop. We have Public Enemy, who come together at Adelphi. Flavor Flav was from Freeport.
Yeah, and
we have De La Soul from Amityville. We have EPMD, who were from Brentwood. Eric B. and Rakim. Rakim was from Wyandanch.
Yeah.
So
so that stuff sort of blows our uncool thesis apart.
It does. It does.
You know,
it does.
It does.
Never mind everything you just read.
Yeah, exactly.
It does. Well, but I'm not sure about the pop stuff, but and of course that leads also into Mariah Carey. So you have that pop side covered, but certainly, you know, Public Enemy were and still are, you know, one of the coolest rock, rap, whatever bands you want to name.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that this was, I think, one of the few moments. They were not they were cool, but the whole era was so different because this was the one moment, I think, when Long Island music was ahead of the culture, because in that period, you know, Twisted Sister kind of flamed out and some of those bands did, but suddenly in Long Island you had pop, like female-led pop and rock and hip hop and rap at the forefront, and that's where we are right now in 2021.
Yeah,
rock is this niche genre, and the music that dominates the charts is sort of pop music, you know, by women mostly, and rap. And so that for a little window there, Long Island was cool and was ahead of the curve, I think.
So are you making the argument now, David, that the Long Island sound, far from being an uncool rearguard movement, was actually the vanguard?
I think it had a belated vanguard moment, actually.
Yeah, sure.
You know, the rock bands that came out of this, we had Wheatus,
right,
you know, who were kind of, you know, a one-hit wonder, you know, kind of alternative rock Weezer type band. Teenage Dirtbag was their song.
Yeah, but also about being uncool. So we're kind of going back to that.
Yeah,
you know?
Going to be uncool. You know, that band Taking Back Sunday, who were kind of an emo pop,
right,
punk kind of band. But again, I think both of those bands were also uncool. They were not quite at the top. Taking Back Sunday were not Green Day or Blink 182. They didn't quite get to that level the same way Wheatus.
Nor did we. Nor did Wheatus. No.
So it's I think it sort of reverted to its uncoolness after a little period there of being ahead of the curve.
So I love the name Wheatus. I don't know where they got that, but it's actually a pretty weird and cool name for a band.
It's a derivation of some childhood nickname, or where they were called. Two of them were called Wheatus.
Yeah.
It's something like that. Yeah. I think it's time, Tom.
It's time.
It's time for Billy Joel.
It's time. It's
time. We've gone through everything. Billy is the quintessential, in some ways, Long Island rocker, because he spanned all these decades, even though he stopped writing rock songs almost 30 years ago, which is crazy to think about.
30 years ago now. Wow.
Almost 30 years ago, yeah. His last real, pop album was River of Dreams, which
I have to comment.
1993, which is, we're creeping up on 30 years since 1993.
Okay, but River of Dreams is like sort of like the classic Long Island album cover in that it's like the most ham-fisted literal thing ever, which is like it shows Billy Joel's head and it shows a river going through his head. Therefore, River of Dreams.
And it has a song called No Man's Land, which is his condemnation of mall culture.
Wow.
Which is quite something.
Biting the hand that fed him, I would say.
About the zombie kids wandering through the malls and so forth. It's quite something. But yeah, Billy embodied that. Like, we've talked about his early days in garage bands and metal bands, sort of, and working his way up. And then he becomes this showman, really, this kind of almost modern standards kind of guy. He's playing piano, which, except for Jerry Lee Lewis and Elton John, maybe not the prototypical cool rock instrument, but he's also writing these songs that actually some of them have become standards and will be played for many decades. But he was not writing cool rock songs in the 70s. That's what made him start.
Billy, I mean, all of the things that we've talked about, is there in Billy. I mean, Billy's never been cool. Billy has the classic Long Island chip on his shoulder. Billy was by definition in Bruce's shadow. And plus Billy's a little annoying. And I think that's the thing that we haven't mentioned yet about Long Island rock. In addition to being proudly uncool, it's sort of proudly annoying.
And how do you define that?
Okay, I'll define it in one line.
Okay.
Working too hard gives you a heart attack. Now, who else would go there? I mean, it's probably one of the most annoying lines in all of rock and roll history. Right. And yet Billy goes there. He crosses over into that. And I think it's always just been part of what I think about Long Island rock is that it's kind of in the chip on his shoulder. It's almost like punk rock, but it's like totally not cool enough to be punk rock. So it just settles on being slightly annoying.
And and speaking of annoying, and Billy, his quote unquote punk album, Glass Houses, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me. And that was his attempt to be modern and punk. And of course was anything but punk.
Right. It was, in fact, it was kind of retrograde in its anti-punk sentiments.
Right. And I was amused by the cover photo. It's him throwing a rock. Again, not very subtle. The album's called Glass Houses, and he's throwing a rock at a glass house, which of course was his house.
It's his house.
Time.
Yes, it was his house.
You're tearing down your own house. You could almost analyze that psychologically. Was that a bit of Long Island self-hatred? Why would he want to smash up his own house for his own success? Doesn't make any sense to me.
But the thing about Billy is that he also he's one of the few Long Island rockers who sort of took on Long Island. He actually sings about Long Island and and the metropolitan New York area, if you count the Jersey songs that he throws in there.
And that is why our playlist starts with Billy the Kid.
Well, of course,
Because
we can, yeah.
Famous
and,
line, as you know.
Well, in the town known as Oyster Bay, Long Island,
Right.
There's a boy with a 6-pack in his hand. Whoa, that's some heavy,
Yeah.
And
the album before
stuff.
that was called Cold Spring Harbor.
Right.
Yeah, which may be, I haven't thoroughly researched this. Maybe that's the first album title, that references Long Island directly. I'm not sure of that, but certainly, I don't know if there was an album before that called, say, Shelter Island.
No.
Or Greenport. Nothing.
Or for that matter, Levittown.
Or Levittown.
Yeah.
The home of rock.
Well, and so Billy grew up in Hicksville, and if you know your Long Island map, that is right next to Levittown. And when he sings about being on the Village Green, there's the Village Green in Hicksville, but that's a total Levittown thing. And so, yes. That's the thing, but that's the thing that I think that really, Billy sang about Long Island as much as Bruce Springsteen sang about Jersey.
He did. And yet, as we start to wind down here, we could discuss what might be the greatest Long Island rock band is the one you would least expect to be the greatest Long Island rock band.
The very definition of cool.
The very definition of cool came mostly from Long Island. And that was, of course,
the Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground. We think of them as a downtown or, midtown, Max's Kansas City kind of band, which certainly where they made their reputation. But, Lou Reed was from Freeport and Sterling Morrison from East Meadow.
And Mo Tucker from
Levittown. If there's a recurring theme in this, Tom, it's Levittown. Forget Memphis as the start of rock and roll or any of that. I think Levittown is ground zero on Long Island
for a certain kind of rock and roll. Let's say.
But it's so fascinating. Even there, to circle back to what I was saying earlier, how, I just knew very little of Long Island rock growing up because no one was really writing about it or covering it much. I didn't know until many, many, many years later that the Velvet Underground had roots on Long Island. I just assumed they were a New York City, Lower East Side, they were East Village band. They became that, but their roots were far from there.
They were so city, they were like the very quintessence of a cool, dark city band. They wrote about scoring heroin, about sadomasochism. They're in a lot of ways so not Long Island that they become really Long Island. Like it's always been said of like, oh, Bruce Springsteen's, the greatest Jersey rocker because his big song is about getting out of New Jersey. Well, Velvet Underground and Lou Reed was very much the same. The only time that he ever wrote about anything close to Long Island is in Walk on a Wild Side, when he extols the life of Candy Darling, who was, Candy came out from out on the island. And, that's the only Long Island reference, I think, in any of his music.
You might be right about that.
Yeah.
Think about all.
No, but I'm wrong. I'm actually wrong about that. Because in one of his greatest songs, he writes about, to me, which is the ultimate Long Island experiences in rock and roll, which he does, on a couple of his records. He writes about listening to the New York radio station. Right. And he can't believe she can't believe what she hears at all. And her life is saved by rock and roll. And that is like the classic, to me, the truest Long Island music experience of all is like listening when you're a kid to WABC, knowing that it comes from New York. And yet, because of that, because it's not from here, because it comes from far away, or comes from the city, it's the coolest thing, and it teaches you about cool. And Lou lived that, so
Right.
that's why he's the greatest. That's why he's the greatest Long Island rocker.
And of course, his really huge album there, once he went solo, was Rock and Roll Animal, which includes a remake of Rock and Roll, and in a very unsubtle, heavy-handed version that was
It's
very different from the Velvet Underground. He went a full-on metal version almost of that song, which is great.
it's almost like he got Zebra as his backing band or something.
We should see in our time remaining if we have any questions here.
Right.
Jocelyn is back with us.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that Kathy has her hand up. Kathy, I'm going to let you speak. And you have to unmute yourself. It looks like you wanted to say something,
Uh-oh.
but you have to unmute. Well, in the meantime, while Kathy's unmuting, couple comments in the chat. Jim said that Steely Dan's essentially started in Denny Diaz's basement in Hicksville, Elwood Place. For Tom, right behind Trinity, whatever that means.
That's right. That's true.
And
I went to Holy Trinity High School in Hicksville, and he's saying that the place where Denny Diaz lived was right behind it. So, yeah, okay, yes.
And Maggie referred to Pat Benatar. She said she had swagger. And she also said, enough dissing of Billy Joel. What's the best Billy song? Because he made some great ones. So she wants you to praise one of his songs.
Okay, so the song the Billy song that I love the most is one of his doo-wop influence songs. And one of the things I really like about Billy is that he incorporates one of the original kind of Long Island types of rock and roll into his music. And I love the song The Longest Time.
Wow. My favorite Billy Joel album is Turnstiles, and the Night the Lights Went Out on Broadway song. I think that's one of my favorites. I remember he did that. I guess it might have been after Hurricane Sandy. There was maybe some live performance thing, and it was very moving actually when he did that in that context. Yeah. So yeah, we didn't want to come across as Billy Joel haters. We
definitely not.
Because we definitely are not. My older sister loved him, and I heard all those records growing up. So,
Janet said, "What about David Bromberg?"
Oh,
David Bromberg is from Long Island.
Yeah, this is he made his name in the Village, but he might have been from Long Island. That's a good point, Janet. We're going to have to research that further.
Yeah.
I think we're out of questions. That was great, you guys. You always make me crack up. A lot of memories too, even though I'm from New Jersey, brought back a lot of memories.
Jocelyn, you've got Kathy unmuted now. I think she'd
All
like.
right.
Oh, good. Go ahead, Kathy.
I think that was a mistake. I'm sorry.
Oh,
But it was a great conversation.
Well,
I'm a Billy Joel fan too. I will say that.
Now,
Yeah,
are you a fan of Billy because he's kind of all those things that we mentioned, or despite them?
I think he's a great songwriter with a lot of memorable tunes.
Yeah, true.
It's as simple as that.
Now, Tom, we forgot one really important player who embodied the trying to be cool thing, which was Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats.
Oh man,
who was from Massapequa. But
so when I was in high school, everybody had there was always like legendary guitarists from each town, and there was a guy from Wantagh that he's a Facebook friend of mine named Ray Matuza, and he was the guy who could play like all the Yes stuff exact, but every
school had one of those. Everybody had one of those.
Every school had one of those. But Brian Setzer, back when I was going to high school, like he was like the legendary guitar player from Massapequa who could play King Crimson exact from what I heard. And that was like, whoa, man. And but then he became a really, I mean, sort of like the closest to cool Long Island guy ever when he went rockabilly and started the Stray Cats.
Right. He made that transition, at least for a brief period of time, that many in Long Island musicians could not make, that uncool to cool thing.
Right.
He was in that early 80s. When that rockabilly revival, the Stray Cats were right on top, on the top of the game there for that.
In Stray Cat Blues, he even sneers at the uncool guy. The real square cat looks like 1974. I mean, he sneers at that guy.
Another beneficiary of the MTV era, all
Yeah,
those videos
yeah,
that they ran,
yeah.
and he pulled that off in a way, until he was uncool again. But and now it always happens. But
Always happens.
he made that transition to cool in a way that Dee Snider didn't quite do, Billy Joel didn't quite do, many others tried and failed. And
Except
what was it
Lou.
about Setzer though? What was it about him? I wonder that made him. Maybe it was good timing. I guess timing is everything.
He could also really play.
Oh, there's that.
In addition to all that, he could really play.
Yeah, he was a very good guitar player.
Yeah. So, okay.
Bonnie wanted to let you guys know that you're brilliant and to thank you. And Janet said,
Bonnie.
apologize, Bromberg's from Tarrytown.
I knew that was a trick question.
Oh, and Terry just put up for anyone who may have missed it, Terry put up the Spotify list, which is a great list of songs. So you can find it in the chat, everybody.
Go right to Big Noise from Spionk. That's
I have to listen to that. I've never heard that song in my life.
You guys always are hilarious and fun. And thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Jocelyn and Terry and everybody at the Shelter Island Library, and everybody support the library. It's a great.
Yes, and David, if you want any of these singles, they'll be on eBay. All right, so
They're not going anywhere, my friend. You are keeping those forever. Those do not go on eBay. Those are important historical documents.
they're too scratched up to listen to. So
It's okay.
all right.
All right,
Guys.
good night, and thank you
everybody.
guys.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.